Hi, this video will discuss how to calculate a marginal revenue curve for a monopolist. I'm going to show you three different approaches you can calculate the MR curve for the monopolist. Two require knowledge of calculus, and one does not require calculus. So let's show you each of those three approaches to find the marginal revenue curve. So if you look at the previous video on marginal revenue introduction, we found that MR was equal to this expression, P, which represents the output effect, plus change in P over change in Q times Q. That's the price effect. This price effect will bring down the revenue. This output effect will increase the revenue. Let's use an example here. The demand curve is equal to P is equal to 5 minus Q. Can we calculate the marginal revenue given this expression with this example of demand being P is equal to 5 minus Q? So what do? The first step that we're going to do is we're going to substitute this amount here in for P. So let's do that. We're going to have now 5 minus Q. That's the first part. Plus, down, this is where we need calculus, change in P over change in Q. So here's our P expression. And so we're trying to find the change in P over the change in Q, or the first derivative of this with respect to Q. What's the first derivative of this with respect to Q? That's simply negative 1. So this is going to be then plus this change in P over change in Q, that's simply a negative 1, times Q. So we've got a negative 1 multiplied by Q. That's simply negative Q. And we also have another negative Q. So MR then is going to be 5 minus, we have 2 of these negative Q's. There's our MR using approach number 1. Now let's show you a second way that will get us the same MR, but maybe you forget this MR definition is P plus change in P over change in Q times Q. This requires also calculus because you've got to construct total revenue as a function of Q only, and then take the first derivative of that total revenue expression. You're going to differentiate that with respect to Q, and that will get you the equivalent marginal revenue definition expression. So let's do that. We've got P, which is 5 minus Q, multiply that by Q, and that's what we've done here. Second step is let's distribute this Q. So Q is going to be this 5 minus Q times Q is going to be 5Q minus, and you have 2 of these Q's, so you got Q squared. Q times Q is Q squared. So let's take this derivative. The derivative of 5Q is simply 5. The derivative of minus Q squared is simply minus 2Q. This is also an equivalent definition for marginal revenue. That equals this one. And let me show you the third approach, which requires no calculus. And most students choose this third way to calculate MR curve. When you're given a demand equation, so here's our demand equation, P is equal to 5 minus Q. MR will always, since this is a line, anytime your demand curve is a line, then the marginal revenue curve will have the same intercept. So MR is going to have the same starting point, 5, and the slope is always going to be twice as steep. MR will always lie inside the demand curve and be twice as steep when demand is a line. So this slope of demand is negative 1. So since MR is twice as steep, then it's simply going to be negative 2. That's our third way to calculate MR, and note they're all equivalent. I find this way the easiest for those who are not comfortable with calculus. Marginal revenue is twice as steep as the demand curve and has the identical intercept. We'll get some practice with some homework questions and some future questions here in these videos showing you this twice as steep rule in action. This is a very important rule though, because if you cannot find marginal revenue, you cannot figure out where a monopolist maximizes their profits. Because recall, a marginal revenue needs to equal marginal cost at the profit maximizing Q star, profit maximizing output. So you've got to be able to construct this marginal revenue curve. Very, very important.